Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. We are continuing the life and times of Jay Carver today, part 5. That's right. We've taken a little bit of a break while we've done some run-it-ups and other things, and I figured today was a great time to continue with the story. So if you haven't seen them yet, go check out the earlier parts. There's 1 through 4 up. I'll link it somewhere. Let's say right here is a good place to link it. So I'll link that over there if you want to check those out. But where we left off last, I've been telling the story of how I got into poker, and I actually started out with a $5 free roll win or cash I should say, that I turned into a lot more money than that. So at this point in the story, we were about in June of 2005. I had been playing poker for about a year or so now. I had earned something like, I guess I actually have my earnings to date. I had earned, at this point, this was my lifetime earnings. No, I don't think that's correct. This is my, this is my total earnings from April through June. This is my earning to date up till June. So this is about where we left off last time. So at this point, I had just turned 18 in April. So I had turned 18 a month and a half prior to this, somewhere around the 1600 session mark. I had turned 18, so I did some work, a little bit of work there, yeah, before I had even turned old enough to really play. But at this point, I was super excited to get out there and play live poker because now that I turned 18, I could play in Turning Stone upstate, in Europe, some places in Canada. So I was excited to get out there and start to play. By the start of June in 2005, I had pretty much sworn off Limit Hold'em, which is what pretty much got me there. But a couple bad sessions, I was just kind of frustrated. So ultimately, I ended up giving up Limit Hold'em to mostly focus on No Limit. So during the summer, I had like a up and down, but mostly break even summer all in all. I played 10-20 for the first time in my life. I played 10-20 No Limit for the first time that summer. I had started playing 3-6 and 5-10, but took a shot at 10-20, and I remember being equally thrilled to play high stakes like that and terrified. The concept of losing $2,000 on a hand, I wasn't really ready for at 18. I played one session and got it in with Ace King on Ace 9 against Ace 9 on a 9-6 deuce flop, and turned to king and immediately left. Booked like a 3K winner a couple orbits after that. When I had got it in so badly, I was like terrified that I could have lost $2,000 there, which was something like 15% of my bankroll if I had lost, depending on when exactly I had lost the money, because my summer was not fantastic. So here's a graph of my summer 2005 graph. This is from June 1st to September 1st. My cash game earnings only. So my cash game record, I still won money, but it wasn't like fantastic. There were some pretty big swings. I was even there for a while, and then I mean, look at some of these spikes there are pretty tremendous in terms of just like it's pretty spiky. But I was very frustrated all in all because I never felt like I could really get anything going. With tournaments included, I hadn't won money online, but I did make 2 trips to Turning Stone, and those were the highlights of my summer. My first time playing live. Up to this point in my life, I actually had never even really met a real poker player before, and never mind like actually had conversations or been a part of any kind of tangible community. So this summer was the first time that got to happen, and it was important to me because it was important in my career because the adults that were around my day-to-day life back home were very anti-poker. Like, not necessarily that they were all anti-poker, but no one understood poker. No one came from like a gambling, I mean, really, most of you at home probably don't have friends that are gamblers. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there was no one that was like the voice of reason. When I had started like losing and breaking even, my parents, especially my mother, were like giving me advice such as like, quit while you're ahead, and you just got lucky, the house always wins, which are both completely nonsense in terms of like, if you're actually, it's just that they're not real thoughts, they're just words. They're literally meaningless evaluations. There was no one that provided me with like a logical thought process of like how to approach it or whatever. It all pretty much came from books and talking to people on the internet. Like, I didn't really have any live support yet. So my over the course of the summer, in addition to just breaking even pretty much, I couldn't help myself but to expand and play everywhere. If there was a game going on the internet, I wanted to have money so I could get in there. So if you look at the pie chart for this is my pie chart for all the online play of that summer. That is one very divided pie chart. It goes in descending order from most played to least played. I'm sorry, from least played to most played. So I played the most at Stars and then less from everything else from there. But yeah, so I had expanded pretty dramatically my play over the course of the summer in all different online places. But the highlight was for sure my trips to Turning Stone. The first time I went, we just played a couple like daily tournaments, like $100, $200 buy-in tournaments. Played some 2-5 cash. I just won a couple $100. I remember the session actually really well because there were a couple of guys that were like chatty, and I remember having a really good time playing live for the first time. But didn't really have that much success. I went back, though, in August of 2005 to play the Empire State Championships, which might as well have been the main event of the World Series of Poker for me because it was that big of a deal. It was my first, like, big major tournament series. I was so excited just to play a couple of the prelims, and I remember being so thrilled at the time. So I was at Turning Stone, and I've decided that in case you're not familiar, I wrote down most of my thoughts in a diary of sorts. It's a journal diary thing back in 2006 covering the last couple years in poker. So I've decided that the story that I wrote down, I'm not really sure how best to deliver on camera besides just reading it with my best, with the most gusto that I can muster. So that's what I've decided to do here. So, I went downstairs one night to the poker room, maybe 2 a.m. It was packed. There were a ton of games going. I went over to the 5-5 game that I was going to play and just was watching, but nothing was really going on. It seemed like a not a great game. So I went to play a satellite, which, by the way, that thought process hasn't entered my mind probably since that day. Oh, there's no action. Let's go play a satellite. Yeah, that's never happened, I think, since this day in August of 2005. So I played this satellite and I busted pretty quickly. But before I busted, I met this guy who was also staying there. Some young kid, but older than me, like 5 years older than me. I was 18. Remember, I was probably like the youngest guy in the poker room, or at least I was the favorite. I was only like 3 months older than the minimum age to play. This guy told me a story that he was staying with a friend of his that was very good, and his friend's name was Peter, but he was planning on changing his name to Ace. Okay, even back then I was a little dubious at somebody being like, "Oh, you're so super sick, but you're changing your name to Ace." Like, I was pretty dubious of that back then, and it didn't help. It wasn't helped by the fact that the only Ace that I had ever heard of, or even like really even heard of, at that point in my life, was the Ace from the Ambiguously Gay duo. Yes, that's right. That was the only Ace that I had ever heard of at that point in my life. So that was my expectations for this guy were pretty low. So before I busted, a mutual friend of Ace's and my friend whose name has unfortunately escaped the history books, my newfound satellite buddy, a mutual friend of his and this Ace guy's came upstairs to tell him that Ace had been challenged to a $1,000 heads-up match during his session downstairs. And after we both busted, we had to go investigate this huge high-stakes challenge that had been thrown down at this 5-5 game. So we go downstairs, and this Ace/Peter guy, and by the way, I don't know who it is. I have no clue, so don't know. But he was a young kid, seemed very like confident and a little bit on the stubborn, aggressive side, not just poker wise. It seemed like this kid was not the type to just roll over. Across from Ace was this huge guy. These two guys are impossible to miss in the poker room, as their dramatic blow-up was the center and the focus of the entire poker room, which at this point was the old poker room at Turning Stone, which was like in a bar almost. It was like some weird like lounge that had like 9 tables in it or something like that. This was before they had expanded to the new poker room. The two of them are engaged in a yelling match. Like they're just going back and forth, and I'm standing behind Ace, so I have a great view of this whole thing going on. This, by the way, will be rated R for swearing. So if you don't like swearing, I have no other way to deliver this story with the amount of intensity that I'm planning on delivering without cursing. So if you're sensitive to these sorts of things, now's the time to skip ahead. So these two guys are going back and forth, and the villain of this story is just going at it. He's just going, fucking kids think they know everything. What the fuck? You know, what, the fucking kid thinks he knows fucking everything? And Ace is just like, no, I don't know everything. I don't know. I don't think I know everything. And they go, oh, what? No, more than me, huh, kid? More than fucking me. Fucking loser kid thinks he can just bully the whole table. And the kid goes, I didn't say that. I didn't say anything. I hate kids like you. I've won pots so big in my life you wouldn't even know. You want to play me for 1K? And like, I guess the offer had been on the table for a while now. And the kid says, sure, of course, I'll sure, whatever, I'll play for $1,000. Heads up, sure, whatever. And now that Ace had apparently agreed, because beforehand I guess he had not, he I guess this sets the guy off even further, because now the challenge has been accepted. So the guy starts getting out of his seat a little bit, getting all aggressive, and almost like Mike Mattisau, like yelling style at like Raymer from, I guess it was actually like the year before this had happened. Yeah, the guy, it wasn't Mattisau though. He leans up and he's like, you fucking kid, you think you got balls? You want to play me for 10 fucking grand, you little shit? I'll crush you. Yes, with this. I remember it and I wrote it down. I'll crush you like you're nothing. And Ace is like, I don't have 10 grand to play you. And the guy like grins in triumph. He's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, I didn't think so. Like, he apparently feels like he owned the guy. Everything's starting to settle down a little bit. In the moment, you feel like that guy's just tasted his victory. He's like, finally feels like he dominated the kid. And out of nowhere, some random kid who's just playing 5-5 relatively quietly just goes, I'll give him 10K to play you. And then the guy just shuts up, doesn't say one word, just sits there, and everyone else is just like, oh my god, this kid's the real boss. Whoever it was, I don't know who it was at the time. I don't know who it was. I didn't recognize him. I didn't know anyone at the time, but I wouldn't be surprised if that kid ended up being like a good online kid. But yeah, so he shuts up, and I end up having a conversation later with Ace and his friend, and we just talk a lot, and he gives me actually some decent advice, you know, given that I had at first thought he was going to be a little clowny, but he talked a little bit about like some of the stories that his friends had, and like some of the adventures that his friends had online, playing like, I had heard a story about check raising Doyle Brunson at the World Series of Poker, and bluffing somebody off a pot for 20 grand on the internet, and all these stories were like fairy tale fantasies of mine that I had like never come close to even hearing about before, never mind actually like achieving or competing in, you know. So for me, that Turning Stone trip ended up being almost inspiring, just to like make these random friends that ultimately kind of like, it was my first connection to the poker world at large, and I found it so fascinating, like to see other people that had and hear these stories of success and even stories of failure, but to hear all these people have their adventure. It was something that I wanted very badly. It was something that it really motivated me to be the best poker player I could be, to play the most poker I could play, and to just not accept anything else besides trying to succeed. And although my mother and probably father would have wished that I had taken that same dedication to anything else in college, it's still better to be dedicated about. I feel like at this point in my life, as long as you're passionate about something, it's great, whatever you want to do. But my parents didn't quite feel the same way as I did, and they didn't exactly share my enthusiasm at that point. So also during this trip at Turning Stone, I wasn't planning on playing the main event. Main event was a $2,000 buy-in. Even with my bankroll management proclivities, shall you say, I still wasn't planning on playing a $2,000 buy-in tournament with whatever 20K or so that I had. So I did, however, ended up playing a $20 rebuy. Yes, $20 rebuy satellite to the 2K main event. And I think that's the only live tournament or live satellite that I've ever won. I think it's probably like one of 3 that I've ever played, and the only one that I've ever won. So I was thrilled. It was like I had won a lottery ticket. Like, I was so excited about it. And I actually remember telling people that it was like my main event. That was what I was like. That was it. It was my World Series of Poker main event. It was the biggest buy-in I'd ever played by a ton. I mean, the biggest before was a $400 buy-in. Now I was playing a 2K, my biggest tournament live ever by a mile, and I was so excited to play. I remember the tournament started at 9 a.m. because Turning Stone starts the tournaments very, very early for some insane reason. And I got there early, which shows the level of commitment that I had felt to this tournament. And first guy to sit with me was a guy that I don't know for sure if I recognized him when he sat down, but it turned out to be Pete the Beat Giordano, who is an online poker legend, one of the first like real online success stories. You know, he had I don't know what he does anymore, but at the time he had been very successful at tournaments online, and I had known who he was. He was sponsored by a poker site, so he definitely came off as a professional, and I don't remember whether I knew it immediately or found out later, but he was a very intimidating presence, and he was the first like real professional poker player that I had got to play with live, and he had a very intimidating table presence because every time like, and it wasn't even like from this chair now looking back I go, how is this intimidating? But at the time, as a brand new live player, every time before he saw a flop, he would go, "Pair the board, dealer," and every time there's a turn card or a river card, he would say something like that, and it kind of exuded a confidence that I not only could I not replicate, but it was very intimidating to me because I was still I wasn't even used to the cards and the chips, and meanwhile this guy's over there talking up a storm, doing this and that and everything else, and made me uncomfortable. So it was something that at the time I didn't quite have the understanding of like how to turn that into something that could be a weapon for me, but I remember being almost in awe of it. And in addition to Pete the Beat, I also was joined by a guy who was wearing a like Ultimate Poker Challenge bracelet. I was like, that was like the coolest thing ever. And Al Crux sat, who had made the main event final table. I think it was either that year or the year before. So again, was another like scary thing. I was like, oh my God, Al Crux and Pete the Beat. It was like, I was so intimidated back then, and it was just like. It's funny looking back at just how excited / like it was, though I don't think I was ever as intimidated sitting at a poker table the rest of my career. And I've played some scary tables in my life. I don't think I was ever as nervous as I was for that lineup on day one then. So I ended up playing pretty conservatively for a few hours. Pete the Beat actually bust Al Crux with trips against pocket jacks on a queen for queen board. I ended up losing a pretty big pot with straight versus straight, the bad end versus a hand that I would never give away much money now, but I had like the very bottom end of a straight. He had top end of a straight, and I somehow gave away a bunch of chips there. And ended up getting an ace-king versus jack-7 and lost. So that was just that. And I did my classic Jay Carver thing. If you're a friend of mine, you know this, that as soon as I bust out of an event and the tournament is over, I am out of there. So that's what I did. I busted, instantly left to go home. I've done that from Australia. I've done that from like all tournaments across the world. Back in those days, when I was out, I was out. I was home before you knew it. And so yeah, I ended up not winning money that trip, but I walked away. I drove away, drove back home with I left Turning Stone that trip with a newfound perspective for poker, a newfound appreciation for what poker could be. I had seen people and met people that were at a stage or two ahead of me and could kind of see it as a real thing. You know, at this point, I didn't know poker was going to be a career for me, but I knew I had a love for poker, and I knew I wanted to see where the road would take me. You know, Poker was never promised to me by anyone to be the easy road. It was never, and it isn't, you know, like it's not meant for most people. But for me, I felt like that Turning Stone trip kind of made it clear to me that poker was what I was going to do for a while. It was something that I just had a passion for. I just loved doing it. I loved spending time on it. I loved the community, and I had never felt, even though I was uncomfortable and nervous in like that 2K main event, I felt very comfortable at the poker table. I felt very comfortable playing live with the chips and the cards and the people and the interactions. And I not having success early on was probably very good for my career, because it gave me it gave me an appreciation when I was successful, and it drove me to get there. You know, I've had a couple of students that have had lots of success and during like the beginning parts of their career, and I actually think that that's almost a bad thing for you, because if you have too much success early on, you think it comes easy, you think it's not a big deal, you don't work as hard. There are dangers to being successful early, but thankfully I didn't have I didn't have any of those dangers, because I wasn't that successful at live poker for some time to come. But yeah, so I ended up going home inspired by those stories I had heard about check raising Doyle and bluffing huge pots on the internet, and I just wanted to go home and get myself out of that break-even funk, and that's what I would and that's what I would go and try to do. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I've enjoyed telling this story. There's at least one more part left, if not two, of the old school story, and then I think I'm probably going to skip a couple years, tell some more different stories. I'll do it more like anecdotally, where like the story of how I met Daniel, the story of how I did this and that, and whatever else that it is. So that's my plan going forward. Let me know in the comments below what you guys thought about this. If you have any suggestions, comments, anything like that, I'd love to hear it, and I'll be back with more tomorrow. Thanks so much for watching. I will see you guys soon. Peace.